This is part 7 of the Craftsman Emerson Gen 2 Drill Press Rebuild series. If you haven't seen part 6, click the link at the top of the screen. In this video, we will be masking, priming, and painting parts. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. We got a lot to cover, so let's get to it. Before we can paint anything, we need to mask everything that we're going to be painting. Specifically, any of the areas that are tight tolerances, like the bearing. And these are the two motor end frames or end shields. And I'm just putting some foam rubber plugs in the bearing wells, closing up those openings. Here we have the base, and for the base we just need to mask off the 3 bores that are inside the column opening. And each one of those has a width of a little bit over a ½ an inch. So we're just going to take some masking tape and cut it and then insert it in there. And I'm not sure why, but on floor bases for drill presses, most of the time the milled table surface that's on that base is not polished or milled, really. It's kind of just painted over. And the whole base is painted, really. On a bench top, a lot of times that table surface there is left unpainted. But we're going to paint it. So next we have the table, and we will be masking. There are 2 bores for the column, and there is the lock bore. And then you have that milled back side of the table where you can add the accessory attachment tilting table. So we're just going to mask all of that off. And then we will mask the table surface by flipping it over. And I'm not sure that it really matters a whole lot whether or not the back side where the tilting table attachment goes gets masked or not. It probably makes it easier for that table to rotate if it's not painted. I've never seen one painted, so I always mask it off. And then when we get to flipping this over, I like to mask all of the openings in the table. And this prevents the paint from bleeding through when we go to paint it. Or at least it cuts it down quite a bit. And then I'll use a large piece of parchment or wax paper. And then add some additional tape on top of that. And when we get done with painting the table, we'll come back and just run like a 220 grit orbital sander disc over that table surface to kind of refinish it and remove any paint that may bleed through. Next we have the head. And I've got these silicone plugs that I'll use to plug up a couple of the openings. Most of them are small screw openings. And then we'll mask off all the bores, and there are quite a few. We also have if you recall, on a 100 or a 150, the bottom bearing for the spindle pulley assembly usually rests on top of an outer retaining ring. And when they came to designing the Gen 2, they went ahead and just milled a step in there rather than using a retaining ring. So that bearing actually rests on part of the cast iron. So we'll mask that off as well. It's probably not a big deal if it got paint on it, but this way we know that the bearing is going to seat completely correctly. Now, between those bores, there is raw cast iron on the inside of that opening, and I normally don't mask that. I want to get paint on that and primer on that to go ahead and keep it from rusting. Another odd feature of the Gen 2 is the opening for the pinion. It's a bored hole all the way through, and it's the same diameter at the very outer edge as it is on the inner edge. So it's completely smooth all the way through, whereas on a 100 or a 150, you have kind of two bored smooth areas and a raw area in between where they've removed additional material. And they didn't do that on the Gen 2. So we'll just mask all of this up, and as you can imagine, it takes quite a while. There are some somewhat polished or milled surfaces on the outside of the head casting, especially on the very top where the guard plate goes or mounts on the top of the head, and I'm not going to mask that off. I'm going to go ahead and paint that. I don't see any reason for it to cause any issues, so we're just going to paint that. But on the original, or as it came from the factory, that area was not painted. And you'll also notice that there are quite a few lips and ridges on the sides and on the front of this head casting. So when it comes to painting, we're going to need to paint this upside down and right side up. So now these are all the parts that are going to get painted, and they're all sitting under plastic to keep them from getting a bunch of dust on them. But I wanted to show that I had two friends that are viewers of the channel come through Atlanta on their way to various events in the past couple weeks, and they hooked me up with some more drill presses. So now I have almost complete 3 Gen 2 drill presses. I'm still missing one belt cover, but other than that, I've got everything I need to build out 3 of these things. And I can build them all 3 into floor standing, although that middle one there is a bench top. I've got that extra base and column on the right-hand side of it that I can put on there. And then I also picked up this huge scroll saw, pedestal-mounted scroll saw, and that will be an upcoming video at some point. So when it comes to priming, I like using this self-etching primer from Rust-Oleum. And I get this normally from the automotive section over at Walmart because they seem to have the best price on it. So we're going to just coat everything with this primer first. And the primer is kind of like, well, it's the in-between the substrate, which would be the part, and the paint. And it's what allows the paint to bind with the metal. Without a primer, a lot of times your paint will paint on something, but then it will scratch off or flake off. So painting the hanging parts is really, if we could hang everything, that would be the best way to do it, because then you don't have to worry about having to paint half of it now, wait for it to dry, and then paint the other half, and so on and so forth. But, you know, there's no way that you could hang a base for a drill press unless you've got some steel cable or something. I don't know. That would be crazy. So next we have the end shields for the motor. And if you recall, I have one, the shiny one there, was cleaned up with a wire wheel. And the dull one was cleaned up with Media Blast. And once we apply that primer and then the paint, I think you're not going to be able to tell the difference between the two. But we'll take a look at them after we get them painted and the paint is cured and see if there's any noticeable difference. And I think the reason why you're not going to see a difference is because the primer, in a way, it's self-leveling as well. And so it kind of fills in voids. And I think it's going to negate whether or not that finish on that aluminum or Zamic, whichever it is smooth or rough. And here we have the Stator. And then we've got the table. And I'll just spray the inside of that bore first. And then there's really nothing else to do from the top side, so we'll flip it over. And then we'll spray the bottom and the sides. Now this primer takes about an hour to completely dry. Depending on the humidity and the temperature, it may take a little less or a little more. And when it comes to something like this base, I can only prime half of it at a time. And since we really don't care how bad the bottom of the base looks, we're going to spray that first, and then we'll flip it over and then do the top. Too easy. And having those lazy Susans makes so much of this job easier. So when it comes to the head, I'm going to spray the inside of it as much as I can first. A couple of reasons for that, but the number one reason is because you get a lot of buildup of that primer around the openings that you're spraying through, and you can clean that up before you spray the exterior. I'm sure somebody will ask, so I've got these weird little plastic triangle pieces that came off of a piece of furniture that was delivered, and I just set those down and then kind of balance the bore openings for the head casting on those triangles. That makes everything a lot easier. So this is the paint I'm going to be using. It's an ALK 200 Performance Commercial. There's all the information you need about it and the color and everything. I got this from PGP. And it's an automotive or industrial coating. You have to shoot it with a different gun. And so obviously you have to have a compressor as well. But this is what I use on all of my Craftsman Emerson rebuilds, except for the Gen 1s. So a Gen 4 or any of the commercial models, this is what I shoot it with. That gallon has lasted me a couple of years at this point. I think I've got about 1/3 of it left. And it goes on kind of, I don't know how to explain it. It's got kind of a uneven finish to it. And then once it cures, it's like an enamel that you would use on like an automobile. You can also choose whether you want that to come in 5 different types of finishes, whether you want it to have a gloss finish or a matte finish. I use a semi-gloss, but they've got 5 different ones you can use. And I think I paid less than $50 for that gallon. So it's in the end, it's way cheaper than using spray paint, and it's a much better paint. But yeah, we're going to shoot that on everything. And one of the great things about this is it has an indefinite pot life. So as long as that paint that's inside the hopper on my spray gun stays closed up, I could let it sit in there for a week and then just come back and stir it and reuse it, or pour it back inside the gallon jug or a paint can. The other cool thing about it is that it's got a working life of 3 to 6 hours for recoat. So that means if I paint something and I need to, like on the base, for instance, I paint the bottom of it first, and then I want to flip it over and paint the top, but the bottom doesn't dry super fast. This stuff dries to the touch by about an hour, and handling is supposed to be about 2 hours. But I've got 3 to 6 hours to recoat if I need to, which means that when we get to the base, I'm going to paint the bottom of it, and I'm going to let that sit for about 3 hours, and then I'm going to flip it over, and then I'm going to paint the top. And kind of the same scenario for the head casting. So here we are just painting the table. And that gun that I'm using is just a cheap Harbor Freight spray gun. I think it's like $20 or something. So really, if you've already got a compressor set up, this is by far the best way to paint any of your tools. Just getting the right colors and the right kind of finish, would be key. And there should be, PGP paint stores in almost every major town. So here we are with the base, and this is 3 hours later, and we're painting the top of it. We're going through this weird cold spell in Metro Atlanta, so you'll see me alternate between wearing a jacket and not wearing a jacket. So here we are with the head casting, and we're going to spray the bottom of it first and the inside of it. And then we'll wait 3 hours, and we'll rotate that and balance it on those plastic triangle things, and then spray the inside again and the exterior. There we go. So we'll let all that sit for about 3 hours, and then we're going to come back and remove the masking on all this stuff. So here we are 3 hours later. We're just going to remove the masking. The paint's not tacky or anything like that, but if you were to press your hand down on the surface and hold it there for a few seconds, when you lift it, you would start to see an impression of your hand there. And that's because the paint isn't cured. It's just good enough to touch, and it's dry to the touch. So here we are with the end frames, and we're just going to punch out those foam pieces. And the reason why I removed the masking now instead of waiting for everything to fully cure, which fully cure for this paint is 36 hours, I believe. And by the way, cleanup with this paint, you have to use MEK or something like that to clean up the paint gun and whatnot. But the reason why we pull all that masking off now is because if we wait for the paint to fully cure, sometimes when you pull masking away, it ends up taking part of the paint with it, and you end up with these uneven edges that you may have used tape to mask, like a straight line, for instance. So I like to pull it while the paint is still in that working phase, I guess. Here we are with the stator. We just need to make sure we don't mess up any of those windings. So here we are with the head casting, and we've got a lot of masking to remove here, as well as all of those silicone plugs. I ended up getting one of those silicone plugs stuck deep inside the head casting in a blind hole that I can't get it out of. So that'll be interesting when we go to try to put that screw in there. But worst case scenario, I'll just get a drill bit a little bit smaller than the thread and drill out that piece of silicone. But yeah, so we'll set all those parts aside and let them cure for the next week or so and work on other things. And that's going to wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. If you got any questions or comments, leave them in the comments section below. In the next video, we'll be working on the column. And as always, I appreciate the support, and I will see you next time.